This is a flat map. There's absolutely nothing here except for this store and the selling point. And this is exactly where I'm going to spend the entire next year, starting with a small lawnmower. My goal is to build my own farm with a large railway. Today, we'll expand our fleet with new equipment and even set up freight transportation by train. So if you're interested, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The next morning, the weather was excellent, just right for harvesting. But before getting to work in the field, I decided to take care of the wool that our sheep had produced overnight. I loaded a full trailer and headed to the selling point. The earnings were pleasant. The balance increased by more than $10,000. On the way back, I decided to stop by the store. The reason was simple. My old trailer turned out to be too small. I had to drive back and forth all the time, so I sold it and started looking for a replacement. I wanted something spacious but not too expensive. After a short search, I settled on a rather unusual but very practical model and immediately headed home, since the field was waiting. Upon arrival, I got into the harvester and began the harvest. There was a lot of work ahead, and I tried to move quickly, regularly unloading the collected canola into the tractor, and when it filled up to the top, I transported the harvest to the grain elevator. After finishing the first field, I immediately moved on to the second one and continued working. The harvest was in full swing, and judging by the volume, it was going to be a busy day. The harvest took almost the entire day. Only by evening did I unload the last trailer of canola. The work was done. In total, I managed to collect about 80,000 litres from the two fields, which, you'll agree, is a very decent amount. That means we can make quite a bit of money from it. Without putting it off, I decided to sell everything right away. First, I put away all the equipment I had used during the day, then got into our locomotive, which already had an empty freight wagon attached. I headed to the grain elevator. There, I began gradually loading the harvested canola into the wagon. The process wasn't fast. The volume was serious, over 83,000 litres, but the result was worth it. When the loading was complete, I headed to the selling point. I drove carefully. The weight of the locomotive had increased several times, and braking with that much weight wasn't easy, but everything went smoothly. Once I arrived, I began unloading. As a result, we earned just over $150,000, an excellent outcome. I was truly happy, because now we had a serious amount of money that could be invested in developing the farm, buying new equipment, building structures, or laying new tracks. By that time, the day was already coming to an end. I returned to the base, parked the locomotive under the shelter, turned off the lights, and went to rest. Tomorrow will be an important day. Time to wisely spend the money we earned. Waking up in the morning, the first thing I did, as usual, was go check on the sheep. And, strangely enough, once again, the entire storage area was filled with wool pallets. Overnight, they managed to produce a solid amount. The wool urgently needed to be transported, but there was a problem. We had sold our old trailer yesterday, and the new one, although spacious, was meant only for bulk crops. So I decided to start the day by buying a flatbed for our train. It's perfect for transporting pallets, and it can also be used to move machinery. I immediately got into the locomotive and headed to the store. Once there, I picked out a sturdy railroad flat car costing $20,000 and made the purchase right away. But my spending didn't end there. To avoid moving pallets by hand, I also bought a forklift. It cost $55,000, but I'm sure the investment will pay off quickly. The forklift was loaded directly onto the flat car at the store. I just made sure to strap it down tightly so that nothing would shift during the ride, and then I coupled the flat car to the locomotive. After that, I headed back home. But then a new task appeared: how to safely unload the forklift. There wasn't time to build a proper ramp, so I used pallets and, in construction mode, put together a simple but sturdy wooden ramp. It did the job perfectly. After carefully unloading the forklift, I moved the train a bit closer to the sheep pen and began loading. At first, it felt unfamiliar. I had to match the height and be precise, but soon I got the hang of it and was able to lift 2 pallets at once. Once all the wool was loaded, I got back into the locomotive and calmly headed to the selling point. On the way, I noticed that with 2 wagons, our locomotive felt much heavier, even with the grain wagon empty. Braking became noticeably harder. At one point, I even slightly overshot a turn, but everything turned out fine. After arriving at the destination, I unfastened the straps, unloaded the pallets, and soon we received just over $25,000 for the wool. A nice result. With this money, we'll once again be able to invest in the development of the farm. After that, I calmly returned home. Our field already needed to be prepared for the next sowing. So without delay, I drove the tractor up to the shelter, attached the cultivator, and headed towards the field. There was a lot of work ahead. The soil after harvesting was compacted and needed thorough tilling. The tractor moved forward confidently, leaving behind even strips of plowed, loosened soil. This was an important step because the quality of soil preparation determines how quickly and evenly our future crops will sprout, which means a new stage is coming very soon, sowing. When I had worked through about half of the first field, I realized we urgently needed more powerful equipment. The work was progressing too slowly and I still had plans to expand the farm. Maybe I'd enlarge the current fields or even create a new one. The harvest from them brings excellent profit. We've already seen that in practice. So I headed to the store to pick out a new tractor and a suitable cultivator. The old cultivator could no longer handle the job. I sold it right away, but I decided not to rush with the tractor. It might still come in handy for lighter tasks. Once at the store, I carefully looked through the full range of large tractors. In the end, I chose a powerful case model. It cost us nearly $85,000. Expensive, but definitely worth it. Then I moved on to choosing a cultivator and bought a 6-meter disc harrow for $37,500. After all the purchases, we had around $20,000 left in the account. Now it was time to transport the equipment home. First, I got into our old tractor and drove it to the farm. Its speed was decent enough to get there quickly, but I decided to transport the new large tractor by train. Driving it on the road would take too long. It's heavy, and its top speed is low. However, a problem arose: how to load such heavy equipment onto the train's flat car right at the store. I decided to build a small branch from the main railway line. That way, I could conveniently drive onto the platform from ground level. Once everything was ready, I got into the locomotive and went to test out my idea. I drove up to the ramp, switched to the tractor, attached the new cultivator to it, and carefully drove onto the flat car. Everything went great. The equipment rolled on without much effort. I just had to strap it down securely, and I could head home. Once I arrived at the farm, I carefully unloaded the tractor using our makeshift ramp, but when I was about to park it under the shelter, I realized there was no room left. It was already full. I had to invest in another shelter, which I built nearby for $10,000. Now, we have enough space even for future purchases. And while the equipment rests under a roof, I went off to rest too. A new day is ahead, with even more work waiting. In the morning, as usual, I went to check on our sheep. It turned out they had run out of grass. The feeder was completely empty. Without wasting time, I got into the tractor, attached the mower, and went to harvest some fresh greens. The yield was decent. We completely filled the feeder, and there was still a bit left in the trailer for next time. A good start to the day. Next, it was time to take care of the wool storage. It was full again. I switched to the forklift, carefully loaded all the pallets onto the railroad flat car, and drove them to the selling point. The sale was successful, and our balance increased by $25,000. Returning home, I decided to work on the crossing we had previously built to access the tracks near our fields. It had been made out of regular pallets, and the locomotive would bounce slightly when passing over it. Not very reliable, so I dismantled the old structure and replaced it with solid concrete slabs. The new crossing turned out much smoother and more stable. After that, I started up our new tractor and continued cultivating the fields. With the upgraded equipment, the job went noticeably faster and easier. Work was progressing well, and the result was satisfying to see. When both of our fields were fully prepared for sowing, I started thinking about expansion. The harvest from the current plots was bringing in good income, but I wanted more. So I decided to create one more large field, so that in the future, our earnings would increase several times over. I chose a suitable spot. The plain was flat, spacious, and perfect for working. But before starting to till the soil, I focused on logistics. After all, without convenient access for equipment and transportation of the harvest, working there wouldn't be efficient. I began laying a railroad branch to the new field. My goal was simple: to connect the farm with the future field and loop that route into the main line near the selling point. As a result, we ended up with a full circular route from the farm through all the fields, straight to the selling point and back. Now, we'll be able to transport both equipment and harvested crops without unnecessary trips, quickly, conveniently, and with minimal time waste. One more step toward turning our farm into a true production empire. I also decided to build on our farm the same kind of convenient ramp we had made near the store, so that we could neatly load and unload equipment directly from the train. I chose a spot between the railway tracks and the sheep pen for the construction. There was enough space, and it fit perfectly into our layout. As a result, we got a compact but very functional train loading area with a platform, and went to rest. By that time, the sheep had once again produced a good amount of wool. Without wasting time, I loaded the pallets onto the platform, secured them, and headed to the selling point. With the money earned, and it was a solid amount once again, I decided to continue improving our infrastructure and built another bypass railway line. Now, logistics on our farm have become even more convenient. We can bypass equipment and easily rearrange the train and switch wagons. Next to the new bypass track, I also decided to build turning switches so that we could attach and detach wagons from the needed side. This greatly simplifies maneuvering, especially with long trains. As soon as everything was ready, I decided to test the system right away. Today, I needed to detach the grain wagon and leave only the flatbed. It would be used to transport equipment. The operation went flawlessly. I carefully left the grain wagon under the shelter and moved the flatbed over to our new ramp. There, the large tractor was already waiting. It would need to be transported to the place where our new field would soon appear, but I'll handle that tomorrow. It's been a busy day, and now it's the perfect time to get some rest. Early in the morning, I got into the tractor, started it up, and carefully drove it onto the railroad flatbed. After that, I switched to the locomotive and headed to the very spot where we planned to create a new field. Now everything was ready to begin the first stage, working the virgin land and preparing it for future sowing. Once on site, I opened construction mode and began marking the boundaries of the future field. I wanted to make it as even as possible so that it would be easy to work on in the future. A few minutes later, everything was ready. I immediately got to work. First, I carefully plowed the outer edges of the field to see its actual size, and I was pleasantly surprised. The new field turned out to be even larger larger than our 2 previous ones combined, but that's only a plus. The harvest from it will bring us much more profit, especially if everything is done right. The work wasn't easy. Plowing took the whole day, but the result was worth it. When the job was done, I loaded the tractor back onto the flatbed and headed home. Once back at the farm, I parked the equipment, turned off the engine and went to rest. It had truly been a productive day. Waking up in the morning, I immediately remembered our main task for today, to sow all the fields. Without wasting any time, I got into our old but reliable tractor, attached the seeder, and got to work. The seeds left over from last time were enough for the 2 older fields, and that's exactly how it turned out. Both plots were fully sown shortly after. Everything was going according to plan, but with the new large field, things didn't go so smoothly. The existing supply clearly wasn't enough, and since there was hardly any money left in the account, I decided to sell the wool that had already accumulated in storage. The deal brought in the needed amount, and on the way back, I stopped by the store and bought a large stock of seeds. After returning to the farm, I loaded the purchased seeds into the seeder and then placed it along with the tractor onto the flatbed. After that, I headed to the new field and without delay began sowing. I finished late in the evening when the sun had almost disappeared beyond the horizon. Sowing was complete, and all the equipment stood in the field, glinting tiredly in the sunset light. I carefully gathered all the machinery, loaded it onto the flatbed, and took the train back to the farm. A lot of work had been done that day, but now only one thing remained: to wait for the planted canola to sprout and begin growing. Once back, I parked the equipment, drove the tractors under the shelters, and finally allowed myself to take a breath. Stepping outside early on a December morning, I saw that the canola was almost ripe. Just a little more time, and we could start the harvest. While the crop was maturing, we kept selling wool, and the account balance had grown to almost $157,000. I decided not to wait and invested that money into another harvester. The amount of work this time would be massive, and with only one harvester, it would take us far too long. With 2, everything would go much faster. Since I was heading to the store anyway, I also decided to sell the wool our sheep had produced overnight. I quickly loaded the pallets onto the flatbed and went to the selling point. The earnings were excellent. Now the balance showed just over $180,000. That was more than enough for a major purchase. At the store, I picked out a reliable harvester and also bought a header for $30,000. Now we have everything we need for a large-scale harvest. All that's left is to wait for the canola to fully ripen. After all the purchases, we still had nearly $46,000 left in the account. This amount will soon be invested into further development of our farm as well. But for now, it was time to transport the new harvester. I got behind the wheel, attached the header, carefully drove the machine onto the railroad flatbed, securely fastened everything with straps, and headed home. Now everything is ready for harvesting our canola. All the fields are sown and fully prepared. Very soon, they will bring us a solid profit. And if you enjoy this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.